Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Thoughts and Coffee. It is another Tuesday morning. It's a little cold here in Toronto, so I hope that it's a little bit warmer wherever you are. My name is Sarah Barnes-Humphrey. I am the founder and host of Let's Talk Supply Chain, as well as host of the Blended podcast, which is our new podcast about diversity and inclusion, and the CEO of Ships, which is a technology platform enabling freight providers and importers and exporters to play nice with their air and ocean freight shipments. So welcome, and I'm so glad that you could join us this morning. So we're going to talk a little bit about what's happening on Let's Talk Supply Chain this week, and then I am going to invite our guest up for today, and you're going to love her. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on, my thoughts and coffee post for Sunday, and we've got some great articles to share with you as well. So let's get started with our episode. So the episode this week is Woman in Supply Chain. So the first Monday of every single month, we feature a woman in supply chain on the Let's Talk Supply Chain podcast. And this week is with Deborah. She is the Chief of Staff over at the U.S. Transportation Command. And when I tell you that this episode was incredible, I really, really mean it. Deborah is an amazing human being, and she has done so much within the U.S. Transportation Command, especially on the logistics side. So she talks about her journey, what that's looked like, how people can get involved. And I think she's really inspiring other women to get into logistics and supply chain. So go and check that out. What else have we got? We're going to talk about Blended in a little bit. Let's talk about, it is Women's History Month, which is amazing. And this whole month on Thoughts and Coffee, we are going to be featuring women as our guests in celebration of Women's History Month. There is so much going on. I know GWPP has a lot going on to help celebrate as well. So we hope that you can participate and be part of a lot of the celebrations and discussions that are happening this month as well. Coming up on Thursday, I'm going to be hosting this event in partnership with Women in Logistics, Port of Oakland, and we're going to be talking about incorporating empathy and integrity during a pandemic. Now, the stories that these ladies are going to bring to the stage are incredible. They're going to be talking about how they've had to cut staff. They're going to talk about how they've navigated through that, not only as a leader, but also for their teams. They're going to be talking about, being laid off during the pandemic and being pregnant. And, there's so many things that we're going to be talking about in this panel discussion. So what we've done is we've pinned this post at the top of the Let's Talk Supply Chain LinkedIn page. All of the registration links are there. We also have another event coming up, and that's with Six Rivers. And I'm going to be hosting this on March 18th. So hopefully you can join us there as well. All right. So it is time to bring up our guest. Good morning, Shay. How are you this morning?
Good morning. I am doing so well. Thank you so much for having me.
I am so excited that you are here. But before we get started, I do want to give a little bit of a shout out because my 9-year-old nephew is now watching Thoughts and Coffee and he watches it live and he learns about supply chain. And I just want to do a little bit of a shout out to Hendrix to say thank you so much for supporting Auntie and for tuning in and learning about supply chain at such a young age. So Shay, back over to you. Why don't you tell everybody who you are and what you do, and then we'll dive into everything that we've got to talk about today.
Yes. So my name is Shay Dixon. I am the president and CEO of Allegiant Logistics. We're a premier woman-owned 3PL that specializes in the transportation of high-value cargo. So aerospace, manufacturing, those are our main industries. And I love my job. I love what I do. I provide solutions. So that's a little bit about me.
Awesome. I love that. So I think the first thing that we're going to talk about today is I've had the pleasure of being in Shay's company, not only today, but yesterday as well, because we recorded the latest episode of Blended. And I just want to share this. So this is our episode that we released last month, and it was obviously around the Black Lives Matter movement. But yesterday we came together to record episode 6, and it was all about stories and impact. So while I have you here, I wanted to talk about your experience and what it meant for you to be part of that. And if anybody is looking to subscribe to the Blended podcast, because it is separate from Let's Talk Supply Chain, AJ, if you can put the links there, we'd love for you to subscribe, because we are getting some amazing stories out of this podcast. So Shay, I'm so glad that you joined us for that, and you had so much amazing things to share. So tell us about your experience.
Yes. So for me, my journey has been so unique as a Black woman working in a male dominated industry. So every single thing that I've gone through in life up until this point has solidified a strength, a certain characteristic within me to problem solve. And a lot of the other women on the stage, we realized that we had the same thing in common. And so it was so nice to be heard and to talk about things that matter to all of us who are the minority or who are the outlier, as most people say.
Yeah. And so that episode is going to come out the third Wednesday of this month. And I can't wait for you guys to hear it, because we had Devin, who identifies as an Indigenous woman. And she was talking about, her story and her journey and what that looked like. Addie, we had Veta, and then we also had Mike Cadieux, which,
The one
you
guy.
know, the one guy in the sea of women. And I think, at the end of the day, everybody really brought so much to the table, including Mike. Mike got really raw and genuine and talked about his childhood and his journey. And so I can't wait for all of you guys to check that out. And we'll be releasing that in a couple of weeks. All right. So let's get to the question of the week. So the question of the week is, I need to look it up. Here it is. What is the biggest misconception about working in supply chain? Shay, I'm going to send that over to you. I mean, there's so much, right? There's
There's so
so much
much.
that we can say.
So first, people often confuse supply chain with logistics. So as a logistics provider, they feel that that's supply chain, and they don't understand that there's this huge, massive flow of how products get to your front door from first mile to last mile. And it's so much more than just logistics. Also, everyone always says that supply chain is boring, which is not true at all. Some of the best experts and supply chain gurus I know travel all internationally. They are like on the front end of cutting edge tech. So it's very exciting.
Yeah. And I think you're totally right. I mean, and you've got a lot of supporters here this morning. Just so you
Hey,
see
team.
here, Demetrius, we've got Romina. We love seeing you there. And actually, I should probably say hello to some of the people over on my personal LinkedIn: Joseph, Aaron, Alejandra, Jenna, Rhonda, Kevin, Rob. We see
A
you, and thank
lot.
you so much for joining us
Yes,
today. So back to the misconceptions. I think you're absolutely right. I mean, supply chain at the end of the day, if we're logistics is just a component of that, right? So you've got
correct.
your first mile, which is sourcing the product, buying the product, manufacturing the product. That's what we are really considering first mile. Then you've got middle mile, and that really is some of the logistics components, right? You're looking at transportation. So if you have to move the product from overseas into North America, vice versa, into Europe, what have you, air, ocean freight, that's really the middle mile,
Yes,
and getting it to the depot or the distribution center so that they can pick and pack it. And then that last mile is really the distribution. The product's already in the warehouse, it's already in the shelves. You get an order placed online, you're pick and packing that order, putting it into an envelope or a box or whatever that looks like, and then you're sending it out to the end consumer. And so that really is supply chain, and logistics is kind of that middle and last mile component.
correct.
right?
And there's so much that you can do in between and the whole omni-channel altogether. And so I tell people all the time when they reach out, they're like, I want to get into supply chain. I want to get into logistics. I'm like, learn about
Which one?
everything. They're like, well, where should I start? I'm like, what are you good at? Let's start there. What are you good at? Because there's so many different ways that you can get into the industry. And it's exciting for the people
Mhm.
that are in it. I will say it's exciting. I'm constantly learning constantly learning. So you can make
Yeah.
it fun if you want to.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of opportunity here too, right? That
Yes.
people don't actually realize. I mean, at the end of the day, when I started in this industry, I didn't ever think that I would be in digital media for supply chain. I mean,
Yeah.
sometimes you make your own position, right? Because
Yeah.
things are changing rapidly. I mean, that was one of the things that we talked about on Blended yesterday was that AI and robotics, people don't have 40 years of experience necessarily in that when it comes to supply chain. So, there's so many moving parts, there's so much opportunity, and it's really just about figuring out what you're good at, what you like to do, what you can bring to the table, what are those transferable skills, and figuring out where they can fit, within a company, within supply chain, within logistics, depending on where you want to end up.
And thinking outside the box. When I got in the industry initially, we were still handwriting BOLs. Everything was handwritten.
Typewriters, typewriters, and check.
Typewriters. You're taking it back. But now there's so much that you can learn and do. So even for young people just starting off, there's ways that you can use your skill set and be an asset to the industry for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. All right, let's talk about my thoughts and coffee post.
Yes.
Now, this thing kind of blew up, which I'm really, really happy about. So on Sunday, I really wanted to figure out how we could get more diverse speakers in front of conference organizers in supply chain. Because I feel like, too many times I'm hearing that there's not enough women to choose from or like to invite to speak. There's not enough diverse voices for us to, really bring to the stage.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to challenge that a little bit, right? The time is now. We're in a virtual world at the moment, and we're going to go back to in person. We're going to go back to in real life. But we can solve this problem or challenge a lot easier virtually than we can in real life because some people can make it there, some people can't from a travel perspective. So, how do we do this? How do we make it easier? And how do we get people found? And so that's exactly what I did with this post on Sunday. I was like, who wants to speak? Let's get out of the C suite. Let's get out of the senior management. Let's take a look at people holistically and see what they can bring to the table, bring to the conversation. And let's raise our hands. Who out there wants to raise their hand, be seen, and wants to speak at industry conferences? And that's what we did. 154 comments later, and people were tagging people, and those people were saying, yes, I want to do it. And then I was going back and saying, okay, well, what topics would you like to speak on? Because conference organizers are watching this post. So they want to know that you are interested, but they also want to know what topics you want to talk about. So, what did you think when you saw this post?
I thought it was awesome. I love that you amplify the voices of other people, right? So you're out in the spotlight and people are coming to you as a resource. I know one of the first like social media channels when I got on LinkedIn, your Let's Talk Supply Chain was one of the first ones that I got a lot of that other information beyond logistics.
Mhm.
So for all of us coming to your page and all of the people who are interested in getting into that space, it's difficult to connect with these people in a new arena when you're new. I know I'm very new, not to the business, but to the LinkedIn side, to the networking side, right? The key players, I'm newly introduced. And so having the opportunity to look, I took my notifications off too because it was just post after post after post. I'm like, this is awesome though. You're really
Yeah.
amplifying the voices of so many other people who may not have as large of a following and they
Mhm.
need that to be kind of pushed a little bit further and then also to be challenged too, like, hey,
Yeah.
raise your hand. It's okay to take up space and say this is what I want to do. So I applaud you for even having the challenging and tough conversations. That's what we need.
Thank you. Thank you. And the post was really around diverse voices, but it ended up being more
A lot
about
of women.
women speakers, which is
Yeah.
great. So we are going to put the article in the comments, or at least the link in the comments. If there's anybody else out there that wants to speak on the conference circuit and you're a diverse voice, not just women, we want to hear from everyone. Comment on the post and write the topics that you would like to speak on, because we tag some conference organizers on the post. If you do know a conference organizer, go and comment and tag them as well, because this is going to be where they can take a look at, see who's out there, see who wants to speak, see the topics that they can speak on. And I think that also could change some of the trajectory of the conversations that we're having at conferences as well, because we might not be thinking about those topics, and yet people are coming to the table and saying, I want to speak about this or that or this or that. And then they're like, oh, wait a second. Okay, we've got a speaker for that. Let's put a panel together, or let's put a speaker presentation around that. So really, really exciting stuff. Thank you to everybody who, participated. I mean, let's just keep it going and keep in front of these conference organizers to say, hey, here's a long list of people, let's do this.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. So we are now getting to our articles, and so the first one that we're talking about is about Maersk. So I don't know if any of you guys saw this, but Maersk has set aside up to $5.5 billion for acquisitions. Now that's a really, really big number. They're talking about, actually, I have my notes right here. They're talking about record profits in 2020. AJ is going to ask you guys a question around this, because I really want to know from you in the audience what you think about them posting the record profits in 2020, when importers and exporters, they struggled to get product. We struggled to fill shelves. They're talking about how acquisitions can be the key driver to growth, but I also want to see, some of this investment going to supplier diversity. We talked about this yesterday on the blended episode, and I'm sorry that I keep bringing it up because we haven't released it yet, and you guys will get to listen to it. But we
Soon.
talked about this, right? We need some money for small businesses to do business with companies like Maersk, and $5.5 billion. It's a lot of money. And I'm sure that some of that could be allocated into a supplier diversity program. And maybe they already have money going into one. I don't exactly know, but we need to be investing some money into supplier diversity and helping those small businesses do business with companies like Maersk. I know you've got a lot to say on this, Shay, because, you're going through it right now.
Yes. So for us, just this morning, we found out that we got our MBE from Georgia Minority Supplier Development Council.
Yay!
So we were so excited, because that really that differentiates you as a minority woman-owned business. Having those certifications really, really help. But yes, I agree. A lot of these larger companies like Maersk, they do have supplier diversity, but we're looking for more than just words. We want a certain percentage allocated to not just utilizing and giving these opportunities to small business, but helping them scale, right? If I'm going to go from $1 million company to a $10 million company, I need specific education and resources to help me scale. And then also, what small business can handle $10 million worth of accounts receivable and payable monthly and be able to scale that on their own if they've never done that before? And so I think some of the supplier diversity needs to not just be in the way of dollars spent, but in time and education as well.
Yeah, and being
Definitely.
able to support you in growing, right? You were talking yesterday about insurance costing you something like $2,800.
Yes.
And that's a big expense. So in order for you to go ahead with that, you need to be able to get the contract. I think another thing that, I don't know if we talked about this yesterday, but I talked about this last week at the Procurement Foundry Supplier Diversity Conference. And it was like, you give a 40-page contract to a small business that they either have to pay a lawyer to go through, or they will have to pay a lawyer to go through, which is going to cost them a lot of money.
$1,400
Yeah, and
approximately.
it's
Yeah.
okay. And it's also going to take time out of their day from selling their services and getting new business in the door to dealing with this 40-page contract. Do we need 40-page contracts? Absolutely not. Or do we need the money to be able to support small businesses so that they can hire the lawyer for $1,400 to go through the 40-page contract? I mean, there's so much here, and there's so much support that we could be providing to small business from a dollar perspective. And I think I hope I'm pronouncing this right, TC, even if 10% was allocated into a supplier diversity program for support, though,
Yes.
that's the key here.
Support. And that's what the need is, right? The need is not necessarily to utilize our business. We get the opportunity to get all different tier one companies reach out to us often, but we also often have to decline or have to reevaluate what the partnership will look like, because there's no way that that's sustainable for a small business with under 20 people on the staff.
Yep.
And so I think different type of resources that come along with education, training, and also changing your standard process. So you may have a standard process of $4 million in insurance, EDI capabilities. But for a smaller business, can you change those a little bit? Because those barriers still stand in place. Now we're part of your diversity, but there's still more barriers to jump through. So I think having a realistic conversation about that is very important.
Yes, and understanding from a small business perspective. Just want to say a shout out to everybody over on my personal LinkedIn page. You guys rock and are having a good conversation over there as well. So good morning to all of you. So let's then, I think we've got another comment here just quickly before we move on. 10% of the $5 billion. Yes, that's exactly, and that's a lot of money that can be allocated to supplier diversity. And just want to say say hello there. All right. So our next topic is Shippo. So I don't know if you guys have heard of Shippo. I heard of Shippo, 4 years ago when they were a small business. Laura is one of the co-founders. She was actually on season 1 of this show, and she came on and talked about what they were doing for Shippo. And so they've gone from a small business, and they've just raised $45 million, and they're going to take Amazon on for small, medium-sized business. What did you think when you saw this article? I mean, everybody knows I love the hustle, and they put out some amazing supply chain content that is, different articles and stories that we find typically every day.
Well, I was inspired, right? Because I've followed her journey as well. So seeing her start off in, working with the founder of LendUp and kind of that journey, everything she took from that, and then saying like, listen, I am not looking for a vitamin, right? I'm looking for a painkiller. I want to solve the problem for small businesses in the e-commerce space. And I feel like she's really doing that, and she's doing an amazing job. I always say, if you want a job done with efficiency, find a woman to do it. I could be biased, but I love it. I love that she is challenging and coming for Amazon, and she's thinking of small businesses, and that's, as a small business owner, I'm grateful for that. I really am.
So the question that we're asking everybody in the audience is, has your household spending on e-commerce increased? Davin says 2000%. Peter is like, I'm pretty sure it has. Well, let me tell you, because they share some of the stats in this article, and the stats are e-commerce spending in Q4 of 2020 was at $245 billion, which is an increase of 32%. Now, also to put that into perspective, small to medium-sized businesses went up 28.5% on e-commerce sales, and large customers only went up 4%. So when I talk about, because I talk about this all the time, especially because of Ships, because our platform is aimed at small to mid-sized businesses. When I talk about small to mid-sized businesses being the driver of the economy, these stats don't lie. I mean, these stats are really telling us who's driving the e-com business and who's going to be driving that into the future. And, they're an underserved, underrepresented community. And that's, one of the reasons why we wanted to get behind them as Ships and give them an easier way to ship air and ocean freight. And I'm sure you know this as well, Shay, being a small business yourself. I mean, it's incredible what these businesses are doing.
Yeah, and she is essentially giving them the same shipping power, small business owners, the same shipping power as Amazon. That's just talk about advocacy for a small business owner. So
Mhm.
I love seeing these type of updates, and I am looking forward to seeing the growth going forward as well.
Catherine says, "I don't even want to know how much it's increased."
Me
I'm
either.
kinda with you. And then Jenna says it has, and it wasn't small to begin with. I love it.
Right.
I love it. All right, let's get to our last and final art. It's not really an article. What I wanted to share with you is a recent TikTok video that we posted on our Let's Talk Supply Chain TikTok. You can't hear it, but I do want to play it for you while we're talking about it because we're talking about sustainable supply chains. And Abby, who runs our TikTok page, does an amazing job of bringing together supply chain conversations around different aspects of supply chain from the next gen point of view, which I think is really, really great and refreshing, right? Because we get to see what they're thinking about and what they're doing. And so this one is about sustainable supply chain. And what she's talking about is what does that look like? Well, Amazon gives us an option to sell with to sorry, get a product delivered with less packaging and less resources. She also talks about a closed supply chain, which means that you can take your clothes and you can recycle them in a variety of different ways. There's a lot of different things that we can do through thrift stores and selling them online if you want, or even donating them online. So, what did you think about this? I know we've got a question for the audience around this one as well. I'll wait for AJ to post that. But while we are, what do you think about this? What do you think about sustainable supply chains?
I love it. I even being in logistics and working side by side with people who are in supply chain every day, I find it difficult to hit no rush shipping. It's just something like within us. I have to make a conscious effort. Like, okay, this is my elderberry vitamins that I haven't run out of yet. I don't need it tomorrow. I can get it next Thursday with my other packages, right? Making that conscious effort, it really, really helps, right? It just a little bit moves the needle just a little bit, but it is difficult. So we have to be super intentional about it. And I also like to shop brands that are sustainable and that are doing
Yeah.
something to kind of help. So like Levi's, my favorite. I'm
Oh,
behind
tell
them
me
all the
about
way.
Levi's. What are they doing?
Yeah,
Because
they do a lot.
well, I just before you go on, I mean, jeans is one of the worst like polluters or because they use so much water.
I know. And but they have like specific efforts, and I follow them on a lot of their platforms. They actually reach a younger audience with their content as well because they're educating on different ways they can go about just making the supply chain process more sustainable, especially because they're a jean company. So ThreadUp, I love ThreadUp.
I don't know
Absolutely love
ThreadUp.
it.
I don't think we have it in Canada. There's a lot of things that you guys have in the States that we don't have access to in Canada, but I love this,
Okay.
right? Because the question that we're asking is how do you contribute to the sustainable supply chain process as a consumer? And I think, there's a lot of different ways that we can do that. And that TikTok video shows how you can be a little bit more intentional and how you can be part of cleaning up what supply chain leaves behind, right? Because in a
Yes.
variety of different ways, supply chain does leave behind carbon footprint, packaging, all sorts of things. And if we're a little bit more intentional, we can be part of that change. And, I don't know about you, but when I get an Amazon package with all of that packaging, I mean, we need to reduce that. But I also think, recycling programs, right? And not just recycling, but reusing. So, how do we reuse this end product? And how do we talk to the company about how we can reuse it so it's not ending up in a landfill and so that we can make better choices and better business through thinking about the circular supply chain? And what does that look like? And how can we make better choices to really elevate that sustainable supply chain?
Yes. I
Yeah.
totally agree. And recycling is difficult because especially with certain like we're the worst. Getting Amazon boxes, what do you do with them?
Mhm.
What literally because they sit in my garage until they get reused some way somehow. But for other people, what's that process like? What can we do to kind of make this process a little bit better? These are all great questions.
Absolutely. Well, we're not going to solve all the world's challenges today,
Not today.
because we literally only have about 15 seconds. So, Shay, I just want to say congratulations because that is huge news, and I'm so glad that you shared that with us today. And I'm really just excited that you joined us and shared your thoughts in these conversations and was a part of Blended yesterday and wanted to be part of Thoughts and Coffee. So, thank you so much for joining me today on this episode. And I just want to give a shout out to everybody in the audience as well on my personal LinkedIn, across Facebook, YouTube, the Let's Talk Supply Chain LinkedIn, our Twitter as well. Thank you, as always, for joining us and being part of this conversation.